He thought he had the perfect life, a beautiful wife, a newborn son, and a mansion overlooking the Seine. But one quiet afternoon, he walked into the nursery. And what he saw shattered everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and blood. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the Montreux estate, casting a golden sheen over the marble floors of the Parisian mansion nestled discreetly in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside the city's buzzing center. Birds chirped in the manicured garden. A chauffeur was already polishing the black Bentley at the gate. The world of Etienne Montreux, one of France's youngest self-made millionaires, was built on silence, routine, and controlled elegance. At 37, Etienne had everything the tabloids envied: a software empire valued at over 300 million euros, a stone villa with a view of the Seine, and a wife often featured on the covers of fashion magazines. Isabelle Moreau, his wife of 4 years, had once graced the runways in Milan and now spent her days organizing charity galas and hosting designer brunches. Together, they were the couple everyone in Paris talked about, not just because of their fortune, but because of what they had just brought into the world: a child. After years of rumors and failed IVF attempts, the couple had finally welcomed a baby boy, Louis, just 4 months prior. The announcement had flooded every newsstand in Paris. L'enfant miracle du couple Montreux. One magazine called him the miracle child. No one questioned it, not the media, not the guests who had attended the lavish baptism in the 17th century chapel at Château d'Ymes, L'Maison. Inside the Montreux household, however, silence reigned. Etienne, despite his outward success, was a man of solitude and rigid expectations. He worked late hours in his study, rarely spoke more than necessary, and kept his emotions tucked beneath the surface like folded linens in a drawer. Isabelle, on the other hand, was everything he wasn't: vivacious, loud, glowing. But ever since Louis had arrived, she had grown distant. She rarely held the baby and claimed postpartum depression, excusing herself from most maternal duties. That's when Amahal came into their lives. She was a 26-year-old immigrant from Côte d'Ivoire, newly arrived in Paris with quiet eyes and a scar that ran faintly along her jawline. The agency had sent her after the previous nanny abruptly quit. Amahal didn't speak unless spoken to, but when she held Louis, something in her changed, and so did the baby. He stopped crying, he stopped fussing. With Amahal, Louis was calm, joyful even. It was as though the infant recognized something in her arms that he didn't in his mother's. Etienne noticed this. Everyone did. He began working from home more often, listening to Louis's laughter through the walls. Sometimes, through the ajar nursery door, he would see Amahal humming lullabies in a language he didn't understand. Louis's tiny fingers tangled in her coiled hair. It should have been comforting. But there was something about it. Something too natural. Late one evening, Etienne walked into the kitchen to find Isabelle drinking wine alone. Still in her silk robe, though, it was nearly midnight. The baby hadn't cried once all day. She's too attached to him, Isabelle muttered bitterly, not looking up. That girl. Etienne raised an eyebrow. Amahal? She forgets her place, Isabelle added, swirling her glass. A maid is a maid, Etienne, not the boy's mother. Her words echoed strangely in his mind. Not the boy's mother. He didn't reply. He returned to his study, but the thought stayed with him, tugging, gnawing, unrelenting. Days passed. Morning, Amahal walked Louis in the garden wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The child laughed in that gurgling, innocent way that made the world seem right. Etienne watched from the balcony above, heart unsettled. Why did the baby cling to her? More than his own mother? Was it merely because Amahal cared more? Or was there something else, something no one dared to consider? Isabelle had begun avoiding the nursery entirely. The smell of diapers, she'd say with a shudder, or, I just don't connect. Etienne didn't push. He never pushed. But questions bloomed like mold in the back of his mind. Who was Amaho really? Why had she been so desperate for this job? Why did his son only come in her presence? And most disturbingly, why did his wife look at the child, their miracle baby, as if he were a stranger? Amal, meanwhile, never faltered. She rose before the family, prepared formula, sang lullabies, and rocked the baby to sleep. With infinite tenderness, she never touched her phone. She never went out. She rarely smiled, except when Louis reached out to her with his tiny arms and nestled his head against her chest. And on a quiet Wednesday afternoon in April, Etienne came home unexpectedly from a canceled investor meeting. What he saw when he opened the nursery door would unravel his life thread by thread. But for now, he still lived in the illusion of a perfect wife, the illusion of a healthy, conventional family, the illusion that blood always told the truth. Etienne had only returned home because of a canceled meeting with a German investor who'd missed his Eurostar connection. Normally, he would have spent the day pacing across the conference room at Montreux Technologies, pointing at projections and graphs with his usual unshakable calm. But that day, fate rerouted him. It was just past 3 p.m. when his Bentley rolled into the driveway of the Montreux estate. The house stood still and quiet, as always, with the faint scent of lavender, oil lingering in the air. Isabelle was nowhere to be seen, likely still at her private Pilates session or sipping espresso with her art dealer friend in Le Marais. Etienne didn't announce his return. He entered through the side, hoping to slip upstairs for a quick shower before checking emails. The mansion was so large that his footsteps echoed faintly on the Carrara marble. As he ascended the staircase, he heard it, a soft rhythmic sound. Not crying, not cooing. It was a kind of suckling, and then a lullaby. Quiet, almost whispered. Not in French. Not even in English. The same unfamiliar melody he'd heard faintly over the past few weeks but had never fully understood. His curiosity, sharper than ever now, led him past the ornate hallway toward the nursery. The door was slightly ajar. The sunlight filtered through the white curtains, casting long stripes across the floor. The room smelled of baby powder and freshly washed sheets. Etienne pushed the door open, and froze. Right there, in the antique rocking chair beside the crib, sat Amahal, her blouse unbuttoned. Louis nestled into her bare chest, breastfeeding. Her head was bowed slightly, eyes closed, lips whispering that ancient lullaby as she cradled him with a tenderness so natural, so intimate, that for a moment, the world outside the room ceased to exist. Then she looked up. Their eyes met. Amal's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She shifted slightly, covering herself quickly but gently, careful not to startle the baby. Etienne was paralyzed. His mouth opened, but the only word that came out was, "What are you doing?" Amahal stood slowly. Louis whimpered from the sudden movement. "Monsieur, she began, but stopped. Her voice trembled. He wouldn't stop crying. He was hungry. He refused the bottle, for hours. I didn't know what else to do." His eyes widened. "So you fed him?" "With your own." Her gaze fell to the floor. "I'm sorry." He stepped into the room now, cautiously, his whole body stiff with confusion. His world spun. "You never told me you were lactating," he said coldly, each word etched in disbelief. "I didn't think it mattered. I had a child before." "A son," her voice cracked. "But he didn't survive." That silenced the room. For a long, thick pause, Etienne stood there, watching her hold his son close to her chest, gently rocking him. "No one gave you permission to do this," he said finally. "This is not your child." Amahal nodded, slowly, humbly. "I know. Where is Isabelle?" he asked abruptly. Amahal hesitated. "She hasn't come into the nursery since yesterday morning. Said she had a migraine." Etienne clenched. His jaw, That wasn't unusual. Isabel had distanced herself from Louis ever since they came home from the hospital. Always too tired, too anxious, too busy. But this felt like an entirely different betrayal. Still staring at Amal, Etienne took a deep breath. His mind buzzed with questions. Why would a maid feed someone else's child like that? How could she dare? Or had she not dared, but simply responded to something deeper? He didn't know. He only knew that something about this moment didn't feel wrong. It felt natural. Too natural. And that terrified him more than anything else. That evening, Isabel returned home. She tossed her handbag onto the ivory divan and kicked off her heels. God, Paris traffic is unbearable, she groaned, before noticing Etienne standing in the salon, arms crossed, waiting. We need to talk, he said. She raised an eyebrow. About what? Amal. And Louis. Isabel scoffed, walking past him. Don't tell me you're defending her now. I told you she's overstepping. She was breastfeeding our son. The words dropped like stones. Isabel turned slowly. What did you just say? I came home, unexpectedly. I saw it myself. She was nursing him in the nursery. For a flicker of a second, something shifted in Isabel's face, something like fear, but she masked it quickly with indignation. That's disgusting, she spat. How dare she? You need to fire her immediately. Etienne didn't answer. He studied her, watched her outrage with the same analytical mind that had dismantled hostile tech mergers for years. You haven't held Louis in 2 days. He said calmly. When was the last time you fed him, changed him, sang to him? Isabel stiffened. Don't you dare question my love for my son. I'm not questioning it, he replied. I'm trying to find it. Her face burned red. She took advantage of us. She's manipulating you. She probably wants money and opportunity. That's all these people want. Etienne's voice dropped cold and flat. What do you mean, these people? Isabel froze. Amal passed by. In the hallway just then, holding an empty bottle, her eyes cast down. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The silence around her said more than anyone dared speak. And Etienne suddenly realized something chilling. His wife didn't see a woman nurturing their son. She saw a threat to the lie she had carefully constructed. Whatever that lie was, he was about to find out. Etienne couldn't sleep that night. The silence of the mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt heavy like a blanket soaked in cold water, pressing against his chest. Isabel had locked herself in their bedroom. Amal had quietly returned to her quarters on the lower floor, while Louis, peacefully asleep in his crib, had no idea that the fragile foundation of his family had started to crack. Etienne lay awake in the guest room, eyes on the ceiling. His mind replayed the image again and again. Amal breastfeeding Louis, the way the baby relaxed in her arms. The way she had held him, not like a stranger, but like a mother. And Isabel's reaction, furious, quick, defensive, not of a mother protecting her child, but of a woman protecting something else entirely. And then that look. That split-second flicker of panic when Isabel heard what Amal had done. That wasn't the look of anger. That was the look of fear. The next morning, Etienne made his decision. He wouldn't confront anyone, not yet. He would observe. He would listen. And for the first time in years, he would investigate his own home as if it were a business acquisition, emotionlessly, strategically, thoroughly. It started with the hospital records. He made a discreet call to his private assistant, Claire, asking for documentation of Louis's birth at the American Hospital of Paris. Claire sounded confused. Didn't Madame handle all the birth paperwork herself? She asked. She did, Etienne said. I just want to verify something. Within hours, a scanned file appeared in his inbox. Etienne read through every page, the birth certificate, the attending physician's name, vaccination records. But then something odd caught his attention. The birth record listed Isabel Moreau as the mother, but where it should have listed her blood type, it was blank. Stranger still, there was no record of a hospital stay longer than 24 hours, unusual for a cesarean delivery, which was the listed method. Etienne's brows furrowed. He cross-referenced the dates with his own calendar. Something wasn't right. He remembered the weeks leading up to Louis's birth. Isabel had retreated to her friend's countryside estate in Loire Valley for peace and rest before labor. He hadn't joined her, too busy launching a new cybersecurity partnership in Zurich. When he returned, she was already home, with a baby in her arms, wrapped in designer cotton and named after his grandfather. And somehow, he'd accepted it. Now he wasn't so sure. Etienne called the hospital himself, used a fake name, asked for information about a delivery under Isabel's name on the recorded date. There was a pause. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said in French. There was no patient by that name admitted for labor or delivery on that date. A chill ran down Etienne's spine. He ended the call, hands shaking slightly. The room around him dimmed. It was as if the walls had shifted, letting in a cold draft of something undeniable. His son might not be her son at all. And if that was true, who did Louis really belong to? The next step was a mahal. Etienne found her folding towels in the laundry room that afternoon, her movements deliberate and quiet. She jumped slightly when he entered. "I'm not here to scold you," he said. She looked up cautiously. "I need to ask you something," he continued. "And I need you to be honest with me. Entirely, no matter what it costs." Amal's lips parted, but she said nothing. "Where were you working before coming here?" "A nursing home near Port de Vincennes," she said softly. "Before that, I stayed at a women's shelter for a few months." He nodded. "And before Paris?" Her eyes clouded with something deeper, pain maybe, or shame. "Abidjan. My son was born there. He died in a clinic with no electricity. Fever. I came here to start over." He waited a moment, then asked the question he had been afraid to speak aloud. "Amaha, is Louis your son?" Her eyes widened, horrified. "No, no, monsieur. I would never," she choked, tears welling in her eyes. "I would never take someone's child." Etienne stared at her, measuring the tremor in her voice, the way her hands clenched the towel. But her reaction didn't feel rehearsed. It felt genuine, raw. She wasn't lying, at least. Not about that, but she was hiding something. He could feel it. Later that night, Etienne stood in the nursery again, watching Louis sleep. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell peacefully. His hand curled beside his cheek. He looked like Isabel. Or did he? Etienne suddenly realized he wasn't sure anymore. He had wanted to believe it for so long that he'd convinced himself. But now the doubts scratched at his mind like nails on glass. And so, he made the final decision. A DNA test. He collected samples silently, his own, and a few from Louise. Pacifier, wrapped carefully in sterile plastic. He sent them to a private clinic in the 16th arrondissement, known for discreet handling of sensitive paternity tests. The results would take 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of pretending. Everything was normal, but things were not normal anymore. Isabel noticed the change. "Why are you so quiet lately?" she asked one night at dinner, sipping her red wine with perfectly manicured fingers. "I've been thinking," Etienne said, calmly cutting his lamb, "about our son. About how much he looks like you." Her eyes darted up sharply. "Of course. He does," Etienne smiled faintly. "Yes, of course." She didn't speak for the rest of dinner. On the third morning, the clinic sent an encrypted email. Etienne opened it slowly, heart pounding in his chest. The world narrowed around him as he read the conclusion. Paternity confirmed. 99.99% match. Biological mother, inconclusive, not Isabel Moreau. He stared at the screen. Cold, silent, completely still. His entire body went numb. The baby was his, but Isabel was not the mother. And a Mahal, whose eyes had held such depth, such quiet grief. What exactly did she know? And why had Isabel gone to such great lengths to cover this up? Etienne leaned back in his chair, unable to breathe. He wasn't just a father. He was a man caught in the center of a lie so massive it could unravel his entire life. And the truth? It was only just beginning to reveal itself. Etienne had always believed that truth came quietly through facts, through logic, through careful reasoning. But the truth he now held in his hands didn't whisper. It screamed. The DNA report lay on his desk, staring back like a ghost that refused to fade. His son, Louis, shared his blood. He was undeniably the boy's father, but Isabel, the woman he had married, the woman who had paraded her swollen belly in front of paparazzi, the woman who had smiled with tears in her eyes when she first held their child, she was not the biological mother. He felt sick, for the first time in his meticulously controlled life. Etienne Montreux was on the edge of something he could not calculate. Betrayal so deep it blurred the line between identity and illusion. He didn't sleep that night. And in the morning, he called for Isabel. She entered his study in a pale pink silk robe, her hair freshly curled, a cup of coffee in hand. She didn't sit. "You called?" Etienne said nothing for a long time. He looked at her like a stranger would, a man assessing not the woman he loved, but a suspect. Then quietly, he slid the DNA report across the table. Isabel glanced down, her eyes scanning the bold headings, the numbers. She blinked once, twice, but her face didn't change until it did. She looked up, her mask slipping. "I see," she whispered. "You see?" Etienne's voice was a sharp blade. "That's all you have to say?" She exhaled, her shoulders drooping slightly. "I always knew this day might come." His hand slammed the desk, startling even himself. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You staged a pregnancy, Isabel. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" "I did what I had to do," she said coldly. "I wanted a child. You wanted a child. You were ready to leave me if I couldn't give you one." He stood. "So you stole one? Whose baby is this?" "Not stolen," she said quickly. "He was available. A private arrangement. No one was hurt." Etienne stared at her in horror. "Available like furniture? Or a handbag?" Isabel's composure cracked. "Don't act righteous, Etienne. You wanted an heir more than anything. You said it yourself, your legacy couldn't die with you. I just made it happen." "How?" She hesitated, then sat down slowly, the robe brushing against her knees. "I worked with a woman, a broker, discreet, legal technically. I paid her to find a baby whose mother didn't want him. A young African woman, desperate, alone." Etienne's breath caught. Was that woman? His voice faltered. Was it a Mahal? Isabel's eyes went cold. No, but she knew her. It was her cousin. A silence hung in the room so thick it could suffocate. "She was there," Isabel continued bitterly. "In the clinic when the baby was born. She held him first, not me. And somehow, despite all the paperwork, all the distance, he still bonded to her. As if he remembers." Etienne whispered, "He does remember." "And now look at her," Isabel hissed. "Feeding him like she's the mother, holding him like she belongs. That woman doesn't understand boundaries. She doesn't know her place. She knows his smell, Isabel, his rhythms, his heart," Etienne snapped. "Which is more than I can say for you." Isabel stood, her pride still trying to hold her tall. "What are you going to do? Expose me? Destroy our reputation? Take the child away from the only home he's ever known?" "I don't know," Etienne said truthfully. "But I know this. I can't let him grow up in a lie." She stepped closer. "If you say a word, I'll lose everything." He met her eyes, steady and clear. So will I, but maybe that's the cost of truth. Later that day, Etienne knocked gently on the door to the maid's quarters. Amaho opened it slowly, surprised to see him standing there. "I need to speak with you," he said. She stepped aside. Her room was small, bare walls, a worn dresser, a bed neatly made with faded sheets. On the nightstand was a photo of a small boy, no older than 3, smiling in a garden somewhere far warmer than Paris. "Is this your son?" Etienne asked, pointing to the photo. Amaho nodded. "Ellie, he died 2 years ago." Etienne sat on the edge of the bed. "Isabelle told me how Louis came to us. She told me about the arrangement, about your cousin." Amal's hands trembled slightly. She sat down across from him, quiet. "You were there when he was born?" She nodded. "He looked like Ellie," she said softly. "He cried the same way. I didn't want to interfere, monsieur, I swear it. But when I saw him again here, in this house, and he reached for me like he remembered." She blinked back tears. "I couldn't stay away." Etienne's throat tightened. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, voice low. "You're the only one in this house who ever truly saw him." She looked up, shocked. "You believe me?" "I believe you love him. And I believe. That matters more than anything else right now." Amaho covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Etienne stood. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I want you to stay. Not as a maid, not as staff. As someone who's part of Louis's life, officially." Amaho shook her head. "They'll say I overstepped." "Let them talk," Etienne replied. "They weren't here when he needed someone." He left her room in silence. The house, once cold and filled with unspoken lies, now echoed with something else, truth. And with truth came pain, but also clarity. The days following the incident passed in a thick, almost tangible silence. Marie kept to herself, going about her tasks with mechanical precision. The villa, once echoing with the soft lullabies she hummed to baby Louis, now felt like a museum of fragile porcelain, too quiet, too stiff, too uncertain. Alexander hadn't spoken to her since that night. He had instructed the household staff not to disturb him. From behind the heavy oak doors of his study, Marie could hear nothing, no pacing footsteps, no rustling papers. Just silence. It was worse than shouting. Worse than being fired. Marie found herself glancing at Louis's room every chance she got. The baby had stopped crying. He had returned to his old patterns, eating when fed, sleeping when lulled by the new nanny's routines. But something was different. His eyes searched for someone or something. And when Marie walked past the doorway, his tiny hands reached out, just briefly, before falling limp again. One afternoon, as she cleaned the marble floors of the grand corridor, footsteps echoed behind her. Her heart froze. "Marie," she turned. It was Alexander. He looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. His eyes, always sharp and alert, now held a softness and something unreadable. "Come with me," he said quietly. She followed him, her heart pounding with dread. They walked to the back of the house, away from the grand halls, into the old library that no one used anymore. Dust clung to the tall shelves, and the windows had not been opened in years. It smelled like old books and forgotten time. Alexander motioned for her to sit. He remained standing. "I've spent the last 3 nights trying to understand what I saw," he began, voice low but steady. "Trying to process what it meant. What it said about you, about me, about everything I thought I understood." Marie didn't say a word. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles pale. "I have always believed in order," he continued. "In rules, in structures. That there is a place for everyone, and everyone must stay in their place." He looked out the window, but what I saw was a woman comforting a crying child, a child that wasn't hers. And yet, I've never seen a look so maternal, so instinctive, so real. Tears stung at Marie's eyes. She blinked them back, keeping her head down. I was angry, he admitted. Not because of what you did, but because I didn't know how to explain it to myself. Or to society. A black maid breastfeeding my son. It's something that would cause scandal, disgrace. He turned to face her. But scandal be damned, Marie looked up. For the first time, his eyes met hers without judgment. Without class. Without color. I've watched you with Louis since he was born. You've done more for him than anyone else in this house. Including me. His voice broke a little. And I realize now. Love doesn't always come from the expected places. A silence settled between them. Then Alexander said something that took Marie's breath away. I don't want you to be his maid anymore. Mary's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. I want you to stay in this house, he continued. But not as a servant. I want Louis to grow up knowing that the woman who first soothed his cries isn't just a memory or a shadow in the hallway. I want him to know you as someone who mattered. Marie's lips trembled. But what would people say? He smiled faintly. Let them speak. Let them whisper. The people who matter will understand, and the ones who don't never did. He stepped closer. I've arranged for you to have your own quarters, not the servants' wing. A proper place, with windows and sunlight. You'll continue to help care for Louis, but not because it's your job, because it's your choice. Marie's hands were trembling now. She had never been offered choice before. Only orders. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then, say nothing, just stay. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks. She stood slowly, unsure if this was a dream or some cruel test. But the warmth in Alexandra's eyes was real. Solid. She nodded. I'll stay, she said. And just like that, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. That evening, Marie stood in the nursery. The new nanny had already left. For the day, Louis lay in his crib, eyes wide and searching. When Marie leaned over him, his little hands reached up and found her face. He smiled. And this time, she let her tears fall freely. Not tears of shame, but of belonging. The sun filtered gently through the gauzy curtains of the new room. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. For the first time since arriving in Paris, Marie had a room with warmth, both in sunlight and in meaning. A simple desk sat by the window, and on it, a sheet of parchment, a fountain pen, and a sealed envelope. She had been thinking about this letter for days. Not for herself. Not even for Louis, though she loved him as if he were her own. This was for a future that might never read it. But it had to be written. She sat down, smoothed the paper with her palms, and began. To the child who once cried in my arms, and to the world that will someday be yours, I write this not knowing if you'll ever see it. Perhaps one day someone will open a drawer, find these folded pages, and wonder who wrote them. If that someone is you, Louis, I hope you read it with the same heartbeat you had the night I held you close and gave you comfort when no one else could. Because this is not just a letter, it is the truth. A quiet truth, wrapped in silence and tucked away behind wealth, power, and appearances. You were a baby when our story began. You will not remember it the way I do. But your tears, your tiny fists reaching out in the darkness, they taught me something I never expected to learn again, that I was capable of being a mother. Even if the world refused to see me as one, I am not your mother by blood, nor by title, but I was there when no one else was. When the night stretched long and empty, and your cries echoed through the marble halls, I came not because I was paid to, but because I felt your pain in my bones. There's something people rarely say aloud, that love often grows in shadows, in hidden places where no one is looking. Ours did. And while others judged what they saw, I will never regret what I gave you. You fed from me. Not just milk, but safety, warmth, presence, and in return, you gave me something I thought I had lost forever: my worth. I Was born in a place where black skin was a reason to be told no before I even spoke. I came here hoping to find something different. And I did, but not in the glittering lights of Paris or the promises of Europe. I found it in you. There is so much I want to tell you about the world. About how it can be cruel and beautiful in the same breath. About how silence can be more powerful than shouting. And how being invisible doesn't mean you're unimportant. I want you to know that there will be people who will try to define you by what they see on the surface, your father's name, your wealth, your skin, your status. But I hope you never forget the woman who saw you before any of that mattered. I hope you grow up kind, not just smart. Curious, not just successful. Brave, not just admired. And above all, I hope you remember that love is not something you buy. It's something you choose to give, especially when no one's looking. By the time you read this, if you ever do, I might no longer be in this house. Maybe the seasons will have shifted. Maybe you'll have forgotten the lullabies I sang. Maybe my name will be just one among many. But you will carry a piece of me in you, not in your blood, but in your silence. In the way you comfort a friend. In the way you see those others refuse to see. If someday you find yourself holding your own child, scared, confused, unsure, I hope you'll remember the arms that once held you. Not perfect arms, not privileged ones, but steady. Steady when you needed them most. Let the world think what it wants. Let them whisper. Because between you and me, we know what really happened. We know what mattered. With love that never asked for recognition, Marie. She laid down the pen and stared at the ink until it dried. Marie folded the letter gently, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. She wrote only one word on the front, Louis. Then she slid the envelope into the back of the drawer, beneath a stack of neatly folded baby blankets. Maybe one day, someone would find it. Maybe not, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had said it, that she had spoken her truth, even if only to the walls, the air, and the boy who once cried in her arms. As she stood by the window, watching the early evening light melt across the Parisian rooftops, she heard a soft sound behind her. She turned. It was Louis now, a bit older, wobbling toward her on uncertain legs. He held a toy in one hand and looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. Mama, he murmured. Marie knelt, arms outstretched. And as he fell into her embrace, the world outside faded away. There was no wealth, no scandal, no race, no titles. There was only this moment, and it was enough.